go in the past. Ball! 2 times!
What's going on, everybody? Another edition of the Passball Show. John Pielli here. Today I'm going to talk about the home run derby in Major League Baseball. And, you know, the way I remember it and the way a lot of people remember it, they go back to the days of ESPN and Chris Berman in the late 1980s and early 1990s, the back. And obviously all the great home run derby champions, whether it was Ken Griffey Jr. or Barry Bonds or David Ortiz or recently Juan Soto or Pete Alonso. And obviously ESPN still does a pretty good job broadcasting it. Chris Berman getting up there in years is not as much of a force or is not as much of a factor when it comes to the home run derbies. But you know that there's a place in the game, there's a place in the history of the home run derby for Chris Berman. What the home run derby actually came from was a 1960 series of home run derbies. In other words, a one-on-one competition between some of the greatest players in Major League Baseball. And it's a series that ran for 1 year. It was hosted by a former actor and broadcaster by the name of Mark Scott, who I'll speak about in a little bit. And it put some of the game's best players at that time, some of the game's best home run hitters against each other. And you can make a case that if it wasn't for that, there would be no home run derby in baseball today. Now, listen, you think of three-point competition in basketball, some of the skills things that are set up at the all-star games in all different sports, maybe we would have progressed towards this at some point. But I think what was the beginning part of the idea of having home run derbies in the All-Star break, in the All-Star weekend, was because of this series that existed for just 1 year. And if you think of some of the great home run hitters at that time, you know, Mickey Mantle, Duke Snider, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Eddie Matthews, Rocky Colavito, Ernie Banks, and there was a lot of others, Harmon Killebrew, Al Kaline, Jackie Jensen, Gil Hodges. And just to run off the list of the other participants, you had Jim Lemon, Wally Post, Frank Robinson, Dick Stewart, Gus Triandos, Ken Boyer, and Bob Cerv. And it's no disrespect to keep them in any certain order that they are. Obviously, you know, some were Hall of Famers, some were absolute power hitters, some were absolute stars at that time and MVPs. And the game of baseball was centered around those guys. And I'm kind of thinking it would be pretty cool if you took all the top home run hitters and just had them have one-on-one competitions. And that's what made this thing pretty cool. And it fascinates me how cool this was. And, you know, if you think of the way this was set up, it was basically one-on-one competitions in matches for prize money. You know, and at the time, if you're thinking about 1960, baseball players aren't getting paid a ton of money. So if you win an individual competition, you get $2,000 just for participating. You get $1,000, and then if you hit 3 home runs in a row, you get an additional $500. You hit 4 home runs in a row, you get another $500. Or you hit 5 or more home runs in a row, you get an additional $1,000 for each one that you get to. Now, this wasn't the way that it's set up now, where a batting practice pitcher just throws you a bunch of pitches and you got to hit home runs within a certain time frame. This was actually set up as a 9-inning game. And Mark Scott, who, like I said, I'm going to talk about in a little bit, his catchphrase, it's either a home run or an out. And that's the way it was set up. So if you had a pitch that you could have swung at that was a strike, it's an out. If you hit a ball that does not go over the fence, it's an out. Once you get 3 outs, you move on to the next inning, and it's a back and forth type of thing for 9 innings. And, you know, as baseball's gone by all this time, I'm a little surprised they haven't revisited it, because I just think that it's just part of, it's one of those shootouts in hockey. It's one of those, overtime ideas that you might want to think about to finish a game, or, you know, just entertainment in general. You know, you see in other sports have taken a lot of the glamour away from baseball. Baseball is not the national pastime anymore. It's pro football in the United States. Basketball, in my opinion, is creeping up. And a lot of it has to do with innovation and rules changes and just things that have happened to kind of gravitate more towards the younger fans. And I look at the Home Run Derby, and I think it's fun to watch All-Star Weekend every year, but it just doesn't carry that same buzz. And I wish I was around for 1960 and got to watch these half-hour programs. You know, you watch Ernie Banks go up against Eddie Matthews. Watch Mickey Mantle go up against Willie Mays. Duke Snider against Harmon Killebrew. And those were the best players in the game at the time. And, you know, sadly, the program ends up ending after one season because the broadcaster, the narrator, Mark Scott, ends up dying of a heart attack right after the last episode ends up running. So, you know, he's around, he's okay during the production of everything. And once everything's done, the episodes start coming out, the general public gets a chance to see it. Mark Scott's there for it. And I guess that was his last call. You know, his swan song was putting that thing together. And there were plans to do something else. There was plans for another season. There was plans to do things in regards to other sports. I think there was something involved golf. This was something that was going to be at least attempted to be transcended throughout the world of sports and television at that time. And unfortunately, Mark Scott passes away from a heart attack at the ripe old age of 45, which is the age that I am right now. And you think about it, you know, if he had survived, because from what I'm reading is that rather than get another host or another broadcaster or another narrator, they ended up just ending the series. But from what I'm seeing, the ratings of the program seemed to be pretty good. You know, especially at that time, you know, you're looking at, you know, television kind of booming a little bit. A lot people are listening less to radios. They're buying television. This is something that I thought was very special. A couple little of tidbits. Like I mentioned before, it's the predecessor to what is now today's Home Run Derby that you have at the All-Star break. This competition was held at Wrigley Field. No, not Wrigley Field in Chicago, but Wrigley Field in Los Angeles. And you think about it now, the Dodgers, the Angels were an expansion team that was right about to start in the 1961 season. But what stood out about this ballpark was the fact that the fences were symmetrical. They were all, sorry about that. They were all set up at the same distance, so it didn't benefit you if you were a right-hand hitter or a left-hand hitter. You think about the fact that most of the batters that I just mentioned were right-hand batters. I'm trying to think, was anybody a lefty? Duke Snider was a lefty. Mickey Mantle was a switch hitter. Eddie Matthews was a lefty. So everybody else was a right-hand batter. But, you know, depending on what your strength was, you know, you look at a lot of players nowadays, Aaron Judge, Pete Alonso, when he's really locked in, right-hand hitters that could drive the ball to right field would benefit playing in this park. And I thought that was pretty cool. And like I said, prizes were set up. You're talking about before the Peter Seitz decision of 1975. So the players are still bound by the reserve clause, basically owned by the owners. The owner controls whether they bring them back for the next year and basically dictates their salary. There's no free market. Players got second jobs for the off season because they're not able to bring home enough money to make ends meet in some cases, or to live extraordinary or exceptional. They were unable to do that. And this thing, like I said, I don't think there's any way in baseball, because the players make so much money, there's no way to bring it back now. But for 1960, listen, it worked. And, you know, Mark Scott, I really enjoyed and admired some of his calls. And that, if you go on YouTube, you could check out the Home Run Derby. Very, very strong voice, deep voice, was able to really accentuate the moments. One of the calls that I thought of, you know, if I was doing play-by-play, I'd be interested in his just pretty simple drive to the left field by Willie Mays, and it's gone over the left field wall. Or Snider hits one high in the air to right field, heading towards the line, It's gone over the right field wall. And it was just nothing more, just basically describing what happened. And I thought he really had a future when it came to play-by-play of baseball. And you wonder if maybe one of the expansion teams, the Angels or the second Senators team, or maybe the Astros or the Mets as they're coming into the league in 1962, if Mark Scott's still around, maybe they snag him as a broadcaster. Maybe he had a longer career left as a broadcaster. But I'll tell you, I could watch from A to Z those half-hour programs, and it was just very well done from a production standpoint. Mark Scott's interviewing the opposing hitter when the other hitter's at the plate as they're kind of going back and forth. Really easy questions, nothing intense, but it's not Jim Rome interviewing Jim Everett, right? It's not something like that. But you look at the fact that it was very interactive. You got to maybe hear a couple things from each of the players. Willie Mays going up against Ernie Banks, and I really thought it was cool. And I'm out there. I don't see very much on the internet about this, for the exception of just the episodes. And like I said, it's my free play out there to anybody. Go out there, look up on YouTube the Home Run Derby from 1960, narrated by Mark Scott. Like I said, the predecessor to today's Home Run Derby that you see in Major League Baseball, promoted all the great power hitters, and even some guys that weren't power hitters. Bob Cerv, Gus Triandos, Ken Boyer, I never thought was a big-time power hitter, but you had some of the best power hitters of that time all competing, all wanting to get that $2,000 check, because you know what? That was something that meant something to the ball player at that time. We'll be back with you pretty soon. This is John Pielli. Like I said, you can check out any of my content, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, videos on YouTube. God bless you. And as always, I'll see you on the other side.
I'm not going to go in the past. Ball. 2 times.